AGHAMAZING, my dear students! Welcome back to our science video lesson. I am your science teacher, Teacher Larry, and welcome to AGHAMAZING way of learning science. In this video lesson, we will be discussing about the biotic and abiotic components in an ecosystem, as well as the different ecological relationships. So let us begin. In our previous lessons, we learned about the different biological levels which are arranged in a unique and complex hierarchical organization. If you still haven't watched our lesson on the levels of biological organization, you can pause this video and watch our past lesson for better understanding of our lesson for today. An ecosystem is a community of living things interacting with non-living environment. The branch of science that deals with the study of organisms and how they interact with the environment around them is called ecology. Organisms have basic needs such as food and shelter. However, food and shelter is not enough to support life. Living organisms need other things such as water and air to survive. Organisms are affected by the different components of an ecosystem. An ecosystem is made up of abiotic and biotic components that work together to maintain balance. Abiotic is preceded by the prefix a, which means without, followed by the Greek word bios, which means life. Abiotic therefore means without life. It is the non-living component or the physical and chemical aspect of an ecosystem. On the other hand, the biotic component is the living component of an ecosystem. This includes all organisms that are dependent to one another. This means that each living organism has a relationship to other organisms. Abiotic components includes air, water, soil, temperature, and sunlight. These abiotic components have important roles in the survival of living organisms in an ecosystem. Biotic components includes producers or various plants, consumers such as animals, and decomposers or microorganisms such as bacteria. Now, let us differentiate both abiotic and biotic components in an ecosystem. Abiotic components do not depend on biotic factors for their existence. With or without the biotic components, there will still be abiotic components in an ecosystem. On the other hand, biotic components depend on abiotic factors for their survival and growth, meaning biotic components cannot live without the abiotic components. In terms of relationship, abiotic factors determine the number and type of living organisms surviving in an ecosystem. On the other hand, living organisms might be directly or indirectly related to other organisms in an ecosystem. The biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem work hand in hand and interact with each other to maintain balance in our environment. Without the abiotic components, living things cannot survive. Organisms both depend on the biotic and abiotic factors in their environment. The light coming from the sun is important to plants for them to make their own food through the process of photosynthesis. The sun plays an important role in the production of oxygen. Air contains oxygen that is produced by plants and trees, which allows animals to breathe. Humans, plants, and animals will not be able to live without air. The sun also plays an important role in the regulation of temperature. Temperature is important for the proper growth of plants as well as animals. All plants and animals survive between a minimum or maximum amount of temperature. Animals such as cow, rabbit, goat, and the like eat plants to gain energy. We humans also eat plants and animals to obtain energy. Plants need nutrients and other minerals from the soil for them to grow. The interaction of biotic and abiotic components in an ecosystem is very important in the sustenance of life in our planet. When we say ecological relationships, this describes the interaction between and among organisms with their environment. Interactions and relationships exist in an ecosystem in search for food, shelter, and protection. In a community, interactions within and among populations may have important influences on the death and birth of organisms, and on the population's growth and size. These interactions may have positive, neutral, or even negative influences on the interacting populations. Some interactions are beneficial, while others are harmful. There are also interactions where populations of organisms are neither benefited nor harmed. These interactions are called ecological relationships. There are 5 types of ecological relationships that exist in an ecosystem, namely mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, predation, and competition. Let us start first with mutualism. Mutualism is an ecological relationship where both organisms benefit from each other's interaction. It plays an important role in the growth, reproduction, and survival of an organism, and in maintaining the balance of the ecosystem. It exhibits positive relationship. An example of this is the relationship that exists between a flowering plant and a bee. The bees fly from flower to flower in search for nectar, which they transform into food, which benefit this insect. On the other hand, whenever the bees land on a flower, particles of pollen stick to their body. Such particles are transported to other flowers, resulting in plant pollination. In this mutualistic relationship, the bees get to eat and the flowering plants get to reproduce. Next is commensalism. It is a type of ecological relationship that happens when one organism benefits from the interaction and the other is unaffected. It is neither harmed nor benefited. The interaction of 2 species in commensalism is positive neutral, since one species benefits and the other is not affected. An example of this is the interaction of an orchid plant and the tree. The orchid is attached to a tree without harming it. The tree provides a place for the orchid to live. It is also benefited by getting adequate sunlight. The orchid depends on the tree for mechanical support but not for the nutrients. Hence, the tree is not affected. In commensalism, there are two roles played by the species, a commensal and a host. The organism that gets the benefit is called commensal. The commensal uses other organism, the host, for transport, shelter, or protection. Hence, the host is not affected. The commensalism relation is often between a larger host and a smaller commensal. The role of the orchid is commensal, and the tree is the host. The next ecological relationship is parasitism. Parasitism happens when one organism benefits and the other is harmed. Their interaction is positive-negative. Since one species benefits and the other is harmed, the organism that benefits from the relationship is called parasite, and the organism that is harmed is called host. The parasite is usually smaller than the host. The parasite may live inside the body of the host, just like a tapeworm inside the intestine of a cow. The tapeworms depend on the intestine of the cow for their food and nutrients. Some parasites live outside the body of the host, like that of the mosquito. The mosquito is a parasite that lives outside the body of the host. It sucks blood from the skin of human, which is the host. Some parasites can cause diseases like dengue, pneumonia, and malaria. Another relationship that exists in the ecosystem is the food-getting relationship. One organism is benefited while the other organism is killed and eaten by the other organism. This relationship is called predation. It is a positive-negative relationship. An animal that kills and eats other animal is called predator. And the animal that is killed and eaten by the predator is called prey. The prey are less powerful than the predator that eats them. In an ecosystem, competition takes place when an organism competes for limited resources like food, space, shelter, or territory and mates. Competition may happen between organisms of the same species or between different species. In competition, both organisms involved are harmed or affected negatively. It has a negative effect on the organisms. To summarize, an ecosystem is made up of abiotic and biotic components that works together to maintain balance. The abiotic component is the non-living component or the physical and chemical aspect of an ecosystem. On the other hand, biotic component is the living component of the ecosystem. This includes all organisms that are dependent to each other, meaning each organism has relationship to other organisms. The 5 types of ecological relationships are mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, predation, and competition. That's the end of our visual lesson. In our next video, we will be discussing about the effect of changes in abiotic factors on the ecosystem. See you in our AGHAMAZING video.